Hello there everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is 2’s Games. Today we're going to be talking about and predicting the price points of the Nintendo Switch 2, the successor to the Nintendo Switch. I know at least for myself and for many others, we are expecting this device to come in at $400 USD. However, there is the possibility that A, it might be cheaper, although I think that's a very low possibility. But there's also the possibility that this device comes in at a way higher price point than any of us are expecting. So I wanted to talk about that, predict how much the price will be, and how each price point will kind of affect Nintendo Switch 2 in terms of being as successful as the current Nintendo Switch has been. Let's talk about it. Alrighty, good Thursday afternoon if you're watching this on a Thursday afternoon. No videos the past 2 days, I apologize for that. I'm kind of in like a weird mode right now with all the Switch 2 rumors and hype, and also just Nintendo in general, because it really doesn't feel like there's much going on. There's a ton of games releasing. I've been very busy playing video games, but in terms of things to talk about, I could have done a video on the whole emulator thing, the Ryujinx going down, but I decided not to because I don't think people would like what I had to say in that type of video. But today we are talking about the Switch 2 price points. I realized I don't think I've actually done a dedicated video on this, and it's something I've wanted to do especially ever since the PS5 Pro was announced, because the moment the PS5 Pro was announced at $700, it kind of got a lot of people shifting their price point predictions when it comes to the Switch 2. As I said at the top of the video, a lot of us are expecting $400, and I will say that right now, early on in the video, like, that is still what I think the Switch 2 will be priced at. However, I do think there's room for it to be a little different. I also wanted to do this video because as we are potentially on the eve of the Switch 2 reveal, I don't know if the vibes are quite there for October for me. I really hope it does happen this month, but as we are getting closer, the price point is, going to get revealed soon, right? With the Switch, the price wasn't revealed until January, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that, like, if the Switch 2 is announced this month, releasing in March or whatever, or even if it's not announced until January, like, it's very possible that we see the system for the first time and we also see the release date and price point alongside it. So I wanted to make this video to kind of just get my price thoughts out there, right, before it's announced, before I can't do it anymore, because I think it's an interesting topic. And while, yes, I think most of us are kind of dead set on it being a $400 machine, there is that reality where it goes a little bit higher than that, or maybe a little bit lower, maybe, but probably not. So here's why I think 400 just makes the most sense. We'll talk about specs and why that will maybe make it a little bit more expensive in just a moment, but the Switch Lite currently is $200 USD. The original launch model Switch, or the V2 that came out back in 2019, that costs $300, and then the Switch OLED is $350. Now, barring any price cuts or anything like that, right, slotting the Switch 2 in at $400 just makes the most sense, right? And we're in a market now where, like, we're not seeing consoles really get cheaper. You'll see the Xbox Series S and X go on sale around Black Friday, but MSRPs aren't really dropping for these consoles. In fact, for the PS5, and I think Series X even in some territories, the price has actually risen. In fact, if you remember back in 2020 when the PS5 released, the digital PS5 was $400 USD. That thing costs $450 now in America. So we're not in a timeline anymore where consoles are getting cheaper as the generation goes on. We're at a point where inflation is catching up so much. It is going so fast that these console manufacturers are not lowering the prices of their consoles, and in fact are actually raising them. So while I would love to sit here and fantasize about, the Switch and the Switch Lite and the Switch OLED all getting massive price cuts, and then the Switch 2 coming in at like $300 or $350 like the original Switch did, or like the OLED did, right? I just don't think that's reality. I don't think that's the world we live in. That's not the market we live in. I would love if that happened, but I really just don't see it, which means that $400 is probably our best case scenario. So maybe it's a little bit of optimism that has a lot of us thinking it will be $400, especially when we are talking about a device that will be pretty capable. The rumors are that it will be about Xbox Series S level, which is pretty good. It's going to have DLSS. Ideally, given everything that we know, given where Nintendo is at right now as a company, I think $400 would just be the best case scenario. I'm not going to completely rule out $450. I think they could easily get away with it, especially given how expensive Xbox and PS5 still are. $500, I think, is like maybe a 2% chance. I just can't see it. Not because the hardware won't be deserving of that price point, which is what's scary, right? From the specs that we're hearing, $500, like, that would be high, but also we know Nintendo likes to make a profit on their units when they sell them, right? They don't, make a profit off of just software like Sony and Xbox traditionally do. They make a profit out the gate from when you buy the console normally. $500 from that angle would kind of make sense, but also I just don't know, like, how would that do? the Switch is so appealing because it is cheap. $350 is, the higher end model, and even that is still cheaper than the base PS5. It's not cheaper than the Series S at this point, but also the Series S isn't very desirable in general. I just wonder, is $500 enough to get parents in, right? Is that low enough that parents will still just buy, multiple for the household? Because the appeal of the Switch right now, the reason the Switch has sold so many units is because parents are buying multiple Switch Lites and multiple Switches for their kids. That is happening. At $500, I feel like you lose that. You lose a lot of that really casual crowd. You lose a lot of those impulse purchases when the pandemic hit and New Horizons came out, right? Like $500 is a considerable chunk of change, whereas $200 for a Switch Lite is like, that's really easy to, buy into. So $500, while it could make sense given that Nintendo likes to make up profits, and it could make sense given on the specs we've heard, I just don't know if Nintendo would be willing to go that high. They have never sold a console for that price. Even $400 is more than what they've done in the past. I think if Nintendo does price this thing at $500, it would sell maybe not even half of what the Switch did, which might be the reality regardless, right? Like, it's possible the Switch 2, even at $400, doesn't do half of what the Switch did. I don't think so. I think if the Switch 2 is $400, it will still probably get to that, 100 million range. I don't think it would pass the Switch necessarily, although that also depends on how long the generation will last. I mean, the Switch generation, by the time we get the Switch 2, will have been going on for 8 full years, right? So if the Switch 2 lasts 10 years, for example, then maybe we could see it passing that number, especially with Xbox being a considerably less important player in the market, considering how PlayStation has basically dropped out of Japan. Maybe you still see the Switch 2 pass, maybe not like quite up to where the Switch 1 is, but like you see it handily pass 100 million units. Like, I think that's definitely possible. Certainly at 400. At 500, though, I just feel like, I don't know, man. So I guess that really leaves 400 and 450. 450 they could do, I guess. Either way, I think 400 or 450 is what we're talking about here when it really comes down to what this thing will end up being priced at. And I think those price points will be very compelling, especially for the Japanese markets. So the reason I wanted to make this video is the PS5 Pro price point. I meant to do this a few weeks ago. In Japan, the PS5 Pro costs 120,000 yen. So while for us in America, it costs 700 USD, that equates to about 820 USD in Japan. That's how much of a markup it is, just based on where the yen is at right now, right? So that is basically Sony just forfeiting Japan, full stop, in my opinion. Like, I think they have simply just given up on that market, because there's no way in hell anybody is actually going to buy that in Japan. There will be the hardcore audience, right, in Japan that will buy it, and there will be the hardcore audience in America that buys it for 700, but at that price point, at $800 or 120,000 yen, Sony is basically giving up in Japan. With the PS5 Pro being the equivalent of $800, basically, in Japan, if the Switch 2 comes in at literally half of that price, it is completely over for Sony. Completely over. They will have completely won over Japan, which isn't the largest market, but it is a very, very important market. So even at $450, that would still be the best option on the market for any Japanese consumer, especially when you consider that most Japanese developers are going to support the Switch 2 more than any other console. I'm also trying to think about, like, future, right? Like, future models, because if it's priced at $400, that could leave them open for a $300 Lite, maybe a year or two after, right? Like we saw with the Switch Lite, where the Switch came out 2017 at $300, then 2 years later, or almost 2.5 years later, right, we got the Switch Lite, which was $100 cheaper. If they do 400 here, that leaves them open for a $300 Lite, and then maybe 5 years in, we get another OLED model, which is 450 or 500, or maybe we get a Pro model this time, like a more proper Pro, like a lot of us were expecting back in 2021. I just think somewhere in that range, 400 to 450. Of course, that's not including any bundled games or anything. I think most of us understand at this point that Nintendo is not going to bundle a game with their console at launch. There's really no benefit to them to, because if you're buying a $450 console on launch day from Nintendo, you're gonna buy 1-2 Switch, right? Like, you're gonna buy whatever they put out because you're buying the Nintendo console for the Nintendo game. They really gain almost nothing by bundling software with it, right? So at 400, 450, no bundled games, I think they will do completely fine. 500, I think, is when you're really starting to push it, and you're just really starting to having to question whether or not parents will impulse buy this thing for their kids during Christmas, right? Which is where I think you kind of, like, you got to go back, Nintendo. You cannot go to 500. Like, you can. Like, they can get away with it, certainly, but I really don't think you should. And while we're talking about pricing, talking about games potentially being bundled with this thing, I want to talk about the idea of there being two models at launch. I'm not talking two different colors, right? Like, the Switch had the gray Joy-Con bundle and the neon red and blue Joy-Con bundle. I've seen a lot of talk of there being a digital-only Switch 2 and a Switch 2 that has a cartridge slot, and I've seen some people speculating the price difference being $50 to $100. Guys, a cartridge slot does not cost that much to put into a handheld. I think there is basically a 0% chance that Nintendo comes out the gate with a digital-only model. It is possible that, like, 6 years in, they do a digital-only model, and hey, maybe that Switch 2 Lite could be that, but with the Switch 2 being so heavily rumored to have backwards compatibility, with the Switch physical market just being way bigger than on PlayStation and especially on Xbox, right? Like, a lot of Nintendo gamers are still buying physical games. A lot of Nintendo sales are still coming from physical games. I just don't think Nintendo's that eager to push an all-digital future, which is a little surprising because they would benefit so greatly from having it be all-digital. There would be no retailer cut, there would be no physical copies to even manufacture, but it really does not feel like Nintendo wants to push the all-digital future as fast as PlayStation and Xbox have, right? So I just don't think it makes sense for them to release an all-digital model of this thing, at least not at launch. Maybe, I think 6 years from now, that might be a little different, but as it stands in 2024, I just don't think there's really any benefit or reason to think that Nintendo would come out the gate with 2 SKUs, one of which being digital only, when so many of their software sales are still physical cartridges. It just doesn't really make sense. Nintendo is not where Sony was at when they launched a digital PS5. They're not. The split is still far greater in terms of like having it be pretty even between physical and digital, whereas with Sony, I think the last number we heard is that like straight up like 90% of sales or something like that are digital. Nintendo is nowhere near that number yet, so I just don't think a digital only model really makes any sense. And if they do make one, it is certainly not going to be a $100 price difference. With the digital PS5 to the PS5 with the disc drive back in 2020, even then I was surprised that the price differential was $100. A disc drive is more expensive than a cartridge slot, so at most, you're talking maybe a $30 difference. I guess 50 if they want to round up, right? Like maybe a $50 difference, but I just don't think they're going to do that. But yeah, that is going to do it for today's video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. How much do you think the Switch 2 will actually cost? I would love to hear your thoughts. And also just a little check-in point right here. How are we all feeling? I know I posted that video on, I think, Monday, talking about the Switch 2 reveal potentially being in October and how a lot of people have moved the goalpost to October, and I want to believe it. And in that video, I said, like, yeah, I think it's going to happen this month. Man, I don't know. I know it's only been 2 days, but, like, I don't know. I'm not feeling the vibes. Are you guys feeling the vibes for an October reveal? Maybe it's just because I've been beaten down so much, even though I didn't really start expecting a reveal until back in September, right? Even though I wasn't expecting a reveal all year up until now, I just, like, I don't know. We're in October now. We're not really hearing much. I think earlier this morning, PH Brazil, like, reaffirmed that he still thinks it's coming out this year. But for me, I'm just like, I don't know. I think we might just get, like, a Pokemon thing. I might do a video on that, talking about a potential Pokemon Presents coming up here. Maybe we'll just get, like, a Metroid Prime 4 trailer on social media. I really want these bad vibes to be wrong, though. I really, really hope we actually see this thing in the coming weeks. I do think, though, if it is happening in October, we're probably looking at like October 21st in that range, the week after Mario Party. So I don't know how much we'll be hearing for the next 3 weeks, but we will see. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on all this Nintendo Switch 2 pricing discussion, all of that fun stuff. Let me know how you are feeling about the reveal happening this month, potentially. And of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo Switch 2 news, reviews, discussions, all of that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames, and check out my collecting channel at It's Amiibo. That'll be linked down below. Until next time, folks, peace.